Jingiwalla, I'm Kath Butler and I'm the head of the Wollotuka Institute. I belong to the Bundjalung and Worimi peoples of coastal New South Wales. So I started with a Bachelor of Social Science with majors in sociology and anthropology and also linguistics. My dream was actually to become a linguist, but circumstances happened and I was approached by the head of sociology to work with them and to complete a master's program with them. Once I did that, I was offered an academic role, and as part of that academic role, it required a PhD. A PhD wasn't really something that I had ever considered, and certainly not in sociology and anthropology. So I think that one of the things that I found though was that Indigenous knowledges are transferable skills. So whatever discipline that you go into, the foundational elements of building relationships, of being reflective and understanding your process are really critical skills that you can take to any project. So my PhD was on the pedagogy of indigenising sociology. So I have a really keen interest in the scholarship of teaching and learning, as well as a broader interest in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander histories and cultures. And so marrying the two of them together was the foundation of my PhD. I was really lucky to have supervisors, one who was an anthropologist and one who was in the discipline of Aboriginal Studies. So it's a true multidisciplinary work, and I think that that's probably how I think of myself as being an Indigenous scholar who really delves across and within disciplines. I think that what I felt most strongly was opportunity. And the opportunities that arose for me was predominantly around what we call the service element of being in a university. So I was invited to head the university's Indigenisation of Curriculum Working Party. And that was, quite out of the scope of what I had done before to lead a whole of university process. Having said that, I think that probably slowed my progress in the PhD, as well as having a couple of children. So, my friends the kookaburras there. As well as having a couple of children. So I think that what I found was I didn't really have the opportunity to focus predominantly on the production of the thesis, but I think that every experience that I had enriched the process and also enriched the authenticity of my voice. Because particularly I think when you're doing a PhD as a younger person, rather than as it used to be the capstone of a very long career, you are really interrogating the future as well as what you've already achieved. So having those opportunities to grow in leadership was a really important element of giving that authentic voice. So there was a question which was posed by Maggie Walter and Priscilla Payette, where is the sociology of Indigenous issues? And that really was a call to arms, I think, for Indigenous people who were working not just in the discipline of sociology, but in its cognate disciplines. So I was really fortunate, I think, to have some mentorship, particularly from Maggie and also from Professor Aileen Morton-Robinson around the National Indigenous Research and Knowledges Network, which was called NIRICAN. And through that, I think that I was able to draw on the intellectual leadership of some really amazing Indigenous women. And So I would encourage anybody that is looking to enter the field, whatever field that might be, to find those people that you admire, to reach out to them, to learn from them, and the opportunities that you'll get from that are really amazing opportunities. And what we also then we start to develop is this genealogy of knowledge, so I can see in my own work where those ladies have influenced me as a thinker. I can now see when I read some other people's work that through my work, those ideas live on. And I think that for us as an oral culture and as a culture that's particularly concerned about the multi-generational transmission of knowledge, that's particularly strong. So I was really lucky to be able to do that work here in my own university, to work with non-Indigenous colleagues in strategy, planning and performance, and we developed a piece of work that shaped how the university would approach Indigenisation. And I was then approached by the Deputy Vice Chancellor Academic to speak at the Australian University's Quality Audit, or ORCA. And again, what was really amazing, I remember being at that conference where the majority of people were Pro-Vice Chancellors, Deputy Vice Chancellors, Vice Chancellors. There I was, this young level B sociology academic, and when I went to give my paper, the Vice Chancellor sat in the front row directly opposite where I was speaking, and the Deputy Vice Chancellor sat in the back row. So I've been incredibly lucky to have had that senior support, and I think that that's really one of the strengths of the University of Newcastle, is that whole of university commitment. So I know that I possibly have a privilege that other people, might not have access to, but I think it's about finding champions in your university, and in every university executive there will be a champion for Indigenous knowledges. And again, and I'll probably keep saying it, it's seeing yourself as an ongoing learner and probably saying yes to opportunity. So things that you might not necessarily think that you have the expertise for or feel confident with, not being afraid to take that chance and to learn from other people. I felt really lucky to get a national teaching fellowship to look at the Indigenisation of curriculum, and to be able to do some national travel and some workshops around the Indigenisation of sociology, but to also see that as transferable. And I think that probably one of the points of difference with that particular piece of work was that we didn't just talk to tenured academics, we also talked to casuals, because we know that our casual staff are often on the front line of that teaching, needing to try and be innovators while they experience what can sometimes be a fairly precarious workplace situation. And then I also brought in people who were in industry as well. And I think that sometimes when we look at the humanities and social sciences, we don't think about industry and community partnerships perhaps as much as some other disciplines do. But we have people there from ANROS, which looks at violence against women. We had people from cognate disciplines like social work. So it's really about seeing yourself not in a silo, but as part of that broader community, part of industry partnerships, and also part of the academy. And I think that one of the things which Indigenous knowledges and Indigenous practitioners do really well is we understand that everyone is, and the contribution of a whole different range of stakeholders is what makes an intellectual tradition, not just the university. So I think when we look at groups like Universities Australia, which is the group of the Australian Vice Chancellors, and some of the commitments that they have made around Indigenous knowledges, and here at the university we were one of only a few universities to do cultural competency framing that were used as best practice models for the sector. So, not just making the strategy, but also then providing people with the time and also the resources to be able to develop those models is particularly important. We know, for instance, that Indigenous staff often do that on top of their ordinary roles. So it's absolutely critical that groups like Universities Australia commit to providing time and resources. So I think that that's one thing. The other thing would be reconciliation action plans. So again, if you are in touch with the stakeholders in your region, you'll find that many of them have reconciliation action plans. And so those are really valuable opportunities for work integrated learning, but also for research, to enable them to understand what are the needs of the communities that they're serving, and also to really strongly have that conversation that research and academia is a service. It is a service to our community, and so I think that's a really positive way to approach it. I think that we now have a lot more disciplines that are open to Indigenous knowledges. So if I looked at, say, around 2014, I worked for ACARA, which is the national curriculum body for schools. And a lot of people were saying, one of my favourite stories is a maths teacher who said, I don't think that you can have Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander perspectives in maths. What we need is cutting edge, recent maths scholarship. And I said to him, well, my daughter will be very happy. And he said, why? And I said, because she won't have to do Pythagoras. And he went, oh no, I didn't mean Pythagoras. And I said, did you not say we can't have ancient knowledge? It all has to be new. It all has to be cutting edge. By your own definition, Pythagoras doesn't fit that. I think that, in this last 10 years, we're no longer having to make the case that Indigenous knowledges are relevant in the STEM sector. I think that there are a lot of people saying, how can that happen? And that's probably the middle part of our journey. But people are not just saying, no, it shouldn't be in there at all. So I think that, some of the work that we're now doing around STEM, around including Indigenous knowledges in urban planning and those kinds of things, are really pushing what we knew was relevant, but the sector has taken time to catch up to us. So I think that when we think about Indigenous knowledges, we really need to understand that they are place-based. And by place-based, I mean understanding, our local country, understanding our traditional owners, and understanding the needs of particular communities, and not attempting to homogenise a particular perspective. If I was going to think about a way that that I do something that's place-based, so one of my people is the Bundjalung people of northern New South Wales. We have a particular type of tea tree. So if you're familiar with tea tree oil, as many people are, that actually comes from a tree that only grows naturally in the Bundjalung region. And so we have particular knowledges, in particular women's knowledge, around the use of that tree, because it's antibacterial, and where its leaves fall into water, so it tends to grow around water. Where the leaves fall into the water, it actually infuses that water with health. So when we say things like country makes us healthy, it's not a metaphor, it's an actual practice. And if I was to think about Indigenisation of curriculum, I often see that if we look at the body of knowledge that is known as that water source, I think that, Indigenous peoples and our knowledge, we are those leaves that will fall into the water and will infuse it with health. So we've really found that partnerships are incredibly important. So one of the key partnerships that we have at the moment is with the Institute for Regional Futures. And so a lot of those staff have experience around, say, urban sociology, but also around planning. We've been doing some work. We did some work for the City of Sydney. We did an international research report for the Greater Cities Commission on including Indigenous knowledges in urban planning. And so I think that there's a really important space for us to push into for conferences, for publications that people in the industry can use. Because, I think that one of the things that we've really discovered with our stakeholder work is that through search engines like yours, people are searching the literature. So maybe there's actually quite a different audience to what there traditionally was. That's what we've certainly found. So, having our outputs publicly available is really critical, and being able to bring community voices into places where they weren't heard before, and also taking the university out to the community in long-term relationships, not fly in, fly out expert relationships, but seeing that different people are bringing expertise to the space and the ways in which we're going to recognise that's the new frontier, I think. Yeah, so one of the things which we do here, myself and another staff member sit on the Barang Regional Alliance, which is the alliance of 6 of the 7 major Indigenous organisations on the Central Coast. And that includes groups like Darkinjung Local Aboriginal Lands Council, Eleanor Duncan Aboriginal Medical Service, and a range of other groups. One of the things which Barang has really led is data sovereignty. So the Central Coast sits between Sydney and Newcastle, and quite often the data that is gathered is pushed into one of those data sets, and it becomes very difficult to know what's actually happening in our place in the world. We know that the Central Coast is the fastest growing Aboriginal community in New South Wales, because there is a large number of people that are moving into the area. So it's absolutely critical that we are there being part of those discussions around how we're going to use data, how we're going to disaggregate the data, and what that's actually going to mean for the community. So finding out what their priorities are. One of our staff members here at the university, Jake McDonald, is working with Eleanor Duncan at the moment in his PhD work, translating the Healthy Dads, Healthy Kids model to a particular Aboriginal community setting. So, we really see that we're creating, again, those place-based responses. What is it that a particular community needs? And I think that that's a really exciting move for us. So the Wollotuka Institute has just celebrated its 40th anniversary this year. We started with 7 students and a leaky tap. That's been our theme for this year. So it began as a student support arm, and with the support of the university, and also an amazing number of Aboriginal elders, Aboriginal academics and community people, we've grown to have recruitment We also look at retention and student advancement. We have an academic school, so we have our own degree program, the Bachelor of Global Indigenous Studies, which also has double degrees with law, with development studies, are our major partners. We have research higher degree students, and we also have international partnerships as well as community partnerships. So Wollotuka seeks to support Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students, but to also educate all students on the importance of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander issues. So we also sit in some compulsory core courses in other degree programs as well. But we might draw students from environmental science, development studies, social work, criminology. All of those students may choose to do our courses as well. What you may not know is that the University of Newcastle consistently has the highest number of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students in the country. So in the last few years, over 1,500 students every year, which is quite high in the sector. So we really see our role as forming those relationships, but also we'll have researchers who come to us and say, could you look over my ethics? Could you give me some advice on moving into a particular community? So also I think, playing an important role along with the Office of Indigenous Strategy and Leadership in making sure that the ways in which we approach our communities is ethical and culturally appropriate. So I think one of the things that you'll find about the University of Newcastle is its really strong history in health. So at one point, the University of Newcastle graduated over 50% of Australia's Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander doctors. We do have a specific unit called Thuru, and so they do alternative entry and also support the students going through. But from that, and from the university's partnership with the Hunter Medical Research Institute, HMRI, we have a really strong history and track record in medical research. We also, led by Dr. Ray Kelly, have great strengths in Aboriginal languages, and then there's the work that we're doing with Regional Futures, which is really bringing in the voices of urban Aboriginal people as well. I'd also say that we've graduated more Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander teachers than any other university, and we also do research and consultancy work for the Department of Education in reimagining evaluation. So, when I look at what we're doing, it's always about being grounded in culture, being grounded in place, no pun intended, and trying to speak to those institutions which already exist and to have them see that Indigenous knowledges are a strength. So often, and you'll see in the literature, people talk about the deficit discourse. We're very, very strengths-based. We believe that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander knowledges are transformative knowledges, are the knowledges that should underpin things like the Sustainable Development Goals. When I look at my language, there is no word for poverty. So obviously there's a way to say, I don't have something, but there's no word to explain that could be structural and multi-generational. So if we look at something like the Sustainable Development Goals, which at its heart is about ameliorating poverty, I think that we should be asking the cultures that don't even have a word for poverty, not the cultures that take poverty across the globe, for those answers. I'm a big believer that Indigenous history is important, and I think as we look at, a period of global warming, speaking to cultures that actually remember the last ice age, you know, through oral history, that understand rising sea levels, that have the ability to be resilient in the face of that change is particularly important. I think one of the things that we see as critical is that Indigenous peoples, particularly in the Pacific, are at the forefront of impacts of global warming. So, you know, our if you like, our cousins in the Torres Strait Islands and the Torres Strait 8 and the challenges that they've made around rising sea levels, but also understanding and I think being really flexible around those Pacifica peoples that will be displaced from their lands in our lifetime through rising sea levels. And so I think that there's going to be a really important space for understanding what it means to be Indigenous, not on your lands. What does it mean to be Indigenous when your lands are underwater? And I think that so many people see, you know, things like the dreaming or our histories as only being past oriented, but we know that they're past, present and future. So through and drawing on those histories and traditions, you know, Indigenous peoples are going to remake and reshape their relationship to where they are. And I think that that's a really important space. Allied with that, then I think that there are global political and social elements such as the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples to really consider how we can uphold Indigenous sovereignty. But as I was just raising, what is Indigenous sovereignty going to mean when your land is underwater? And when your land is underwater from the impact of industry and actions that you had no part in, you know. So I think that we as global Indigenous people are going to be an incredibly important voice in the rest of this century, and I would hope beyond.